Hi everybody, how are you today? I hope you're doing amazing. I hope you're having a great day. I am going to do 20 minutes, part 8 of The Alley by Mingo Rubio Jr. We're going to do 20 minutes today since I'm going live tomorrow. I want to put it on there since I'll be reading some of this. I don't want anyone to miss it if you're reading or if you're listening to it or watching it on the playlist. So please join me for 20 minutes of my dad's book, The Alley, by Mingo Rubio Jr. Let's get my timer on. I hope you guys, if you weren't at my live, I hope it was okay. We'll see tomorrow. Sending good vibes for an amazing day. 20 minutes. Let's get into it. The land behind the reservoir was a life wild preserve. It was huge. It actually covered over 100 square miles. It had so much wildlife that people could observe, sort of like the Everglades, from birds to reptiles. But that too was abandoned, and the town let it go. People used to go there to just hang out and relax. And then, all of a sudden, things got out of control. Tourists had gone in there and never came back. Mr. Kim looked around, then he removed his hat. He nodded and said, "It makes perfect sense to me." He said, "It's at home, living in its natural habitat. It has shelter, water to drink, and it has plenty to eat. But once it tastes humans, it'll want nothing else. One thing is certain, though. This will not go away. When will this happen again? I don't know myself, but sooner or later, it will search for more prey." He turned and looked in the direction of the aqueduct. As he looked it over, he kind of marveled at its size. He said, "This is a big task we are about to conduct. I'm kind of nervous. I don't know about you guys." Mr. H's tour took us to the far edges of the alley. Then we noticed long shadows starting to appear. We went back to the cemetery down in the valley. When we got there, Mr. H said, "I don't like it here." Mr. Kim said, "I need your attention for a moment." He said, "We've got to split up, but don't go too far." I said, "Hey man, do you have another one of those?" He said, "Are you serious? You must think I'm crazy. Besides, I think you're a little too young to smoke." I said, "Oh, I messed up. Let's restart." Mr. Kim said, "I need your attention for a moment." He said, "We've got to split up, but don't go too far." And after a few minutes, I get that familiar scent. Then I saw Mr. Kim walking back with a big cigar. I said, "Hey man, do you have another one of those?" He said, "Are you serious? You must think I'm crazy. Besides, I think you're a little too young to smoke." I said, "Oh, but it was okay when you hypnotized me." Mr. H walked ahead. Then he turned to find the sun. I had to cover my nose. The stench was so bad. He stopped at a grave and said, "This is the one." He said, "Hey kid, this is where we buried your dad." I rushed over there to where he was. I just had to see. When I got there, Mr. Kim was also at the gravesite. As soon as I looked at it, I said, "My God, it's empty." Then Mr. Kim said, "Sometimes I hate being right." I said, "I can't stand the smell, man. I've had enough. Besides, we've got to go to the alley. It's getting late." And getting through the gate was going to be tough. Then Mr. H said, "No, really, kid, I can't open the gate." Standing at the entrance, we looked up at the sky. We were looking to see the position of the sun. I said, "Man, this place sure looks different at night." I looked at them and said, "I hope you guys can run." As Mr. H took out his key to open the rusty lock, suddenly we heard a noise that shook our souls. We were so frightened right then we couldn't talk. As I started to ask, they both said, "I don't know." All of a sudden, we saw what had made the noise. Mr. Kim said, "It's an old alley cat with a broken leg." Then I said, "Come on, we're burning daylight, boys. You know the saying, the last one in is a rotten egg." Mr. H opened the gate. I asked, "You have a key?" He said, "Remember, kid, I was the one that gated it. And when I chained it and locked it, I kept a copy. But honestly, this isn't something that I anticipated." As we were going in, something caught my eye. I took a step back so I could confirm what I saw. It was the moon coming up over a darkening sky. As they stood there looking at the alley walls, Mr. Kim also saw the moon, and he said, "Oh crap." Mr. H asked, "So what's up? What are we going to do?" He looked at the walls and said, "This could be a trap. If you can't outrun the damn thing, you're screwed." Mr. Kim reached into his bag and pulls out a gun. He said, "Let's hurry up. We're running out of time." It was getting dark. We could no longer see the sun. Mr. H said, "Man, We've got to be out of our minds. We started our trek into the alley, but we took it too slow. Then we came to the place where it started to bend. Mr. Kim said, "Hey kid, how much further does it go?" I said, "Probably about 20 yards or so to the end." Then we passed the old refrigerator where I was at. Suddenly we heard a loud commotion in the debris. We were relieved to see that it was another cat. Then Mr. H said, "Man, that scared the hell out of me." Mr. Kim reached into his bag and pulled out the light. It was getting dark and we still had a ways to go. Mr. H said, "I think we should be heading back, right?" Mr. Kim said, "No, not yet, man. We're just too close." Then I said, "Hey, there it is behind the railroad ties. That's where I was when I noticed the metal grate. But there was something on it covered with flies." We took off the lid and decided to listen and wait. We stood there listening for any kind of sound, but after a minute, Mr. Kim said, "I think it's clear." Then he said, "Pete, you and I will be going down." He said, "Kid, it's too dangerous. You stay up here." I said, "You gotta be joking, right? I'll be damned. I've got a better chance than the both of you have." Mr. Kim said, "So you're coming?" I say, "You bet I am. Somebody's got to watch your ass." And he just laughed. As we went down into the hole, humidity filled the air. Mr. Kim led the way with the flashlight in his hand, and the stench of death and decay was everywhere. In the tunnel, it was very confined, too low to stand. It reminded me of an escape tunnel from prison, the kind you've seen in the movies, of course. Suddenly, Mr. Kim told us to keep quiet and listen. Then we heard sounds ahead in a small corridor. We also noticed a glimmering light, a small glow. Then we got to some kind of chamber, a big room. It was a collection point where all the water flowed, and the glow we saw was a reflection of the moon. That was a chamber where all the tunnels met, and inside it was some sort of foggy mist or cloud. There were pools of water, so the ground was wet, and any sound made was echoed and very loud. What we had heard was water trickling into a pool. I said, "The reflection has to be coming from outside." When I saw the chamber, I said, "This place is cool. I bet you this is where the creature comes to hide." Then I noticed a structure rising up from the floor. I said, "Look up there, guys. Is that some sort of perch? It's pretty high. What do you think it was used for?" Mr. Kim looked up at it and then continued his search. Then he said, "This place would make a perfect lair." We looked around and the room was a little hazy. Then I said, "What's at the bottom? Are those stairs?" Mr. H said, "We should get out of here. This is crazy." Mr. Kim said, "We will after we see where they go." I said, "Let me go." Then Mr. H said, "No, it's too risky." Mr. Kim said, "Go and check it out and let me know." I said, "I'll be right back, so don't leave without me." So I made my way down the stairs to investigate. When I got there, I followed them a short distance. They actually went outside to another metal grate. As I got to the top, I saw hair around the entrance. Then I realized that could be the hair of the beast. As I stood there at the gate, I could see the moon. It had fully come out over the horizon in the east, and the higher it got, the more it lit up the room. I stood there for a few minutes, surveying the land, just checking out a place that I have never been. I looked at everything like I was thinking of a plan. I thought, I just might have to come out here again. I noticed a lot of trash around. It was everywhere. I guess it washed up there when the water got low. It looked like homeless people used to live there. How the trash actually got there, I really don't know. It looked like the opening was used to go in or out. The grate was bent, but the hinges weren't broken. Whatever used the place could return, no doubt, and if so, I didn't want to stay there in the open. So I made my way to some sort of embankment. Then I noticed that it was a wooden dock or pier. I was kind of curious as to how far it actually went. I decided to get a closer look at it since I was there. The dock stretched over a small part of the pond. It looked awesome over the water in a strange way. The place became a death trap before too long. I could imagine how beautiful it was back in the day. I was standing on the edge of the wildlife preserve, something that had been planned and revered. It was kind of crazy how fate threw you a nasty curve. It was kind of crazy how fate threw you a nasty curve, but now abandoned and a place that people feared. With the moon shining, it was rather easy to see, and then as I was heading back along the shoreline, then I heard a noise and I crouched to my knees. It was then I saw footprints, and they weren't mine. Suddenly, something hit the water with a big splash, and it sounded like something was being chased. Getting back to the grate was still a 50-yard dash. Something was coming. There was no time to waste. Sorry, I need water. Oh my gosh. I quickly ran back to the stairs, back to the opening. Then I heard an awful screech and then a squeal. I wasn't waiting around to see what was happening. It sounded like something was looking for a meal. When I got inside, I closed the grate behind me. As I ran down the stairs, I just about fell on my ass. Then something opened the grate rather angrily. It made a grunting sound, and it was coming fast. When I got to the bottom, I was then made aware I wouldn't make it to the loft or back to the tunnel because I saw something at the top of the stairs. I had to think fast, so I quickly dove into the tunnel. To remain undetected, I had to stay submerged. I almost panicked when water went up my nose. As it came down to the stairs, I almost lost my nerve. I thought to myself, this is really going to be close. It went right over me, and the damn thing was big. That was when I noticed that its vision was fairly poor. It carried something in its mouth. It was a wild pig. I was in awe. I had never seen a creature before. Then I remembered an old trick that I often used. I had used a small mirror when I played help tag. So I took it out of my pocket, trying not to move. Then I quickly covered myself with an old dirty rag. I lay there quietly and as still as I possibly could. The guys were still in a tunnel, hiding in the dark. They were in the shadows behind slats of wood. Then we heard a noise, sounded like a dog bark. It was running from something. It was out of sight. Then it made me wonder what it's running from. I had to move. I didn't want to stay there all night. Besides, my booty and legs were getting numb. All the while, the creature started to chow down. I heard it tearing flesh and crunching on bones. Suddenly, it stopped eating. I didn't make a sound. Somehow, it must have sensed that it wasn't alone. It started walking around, just sniffing the hazy air. I couldn't move. I was trapped. I had no way out. Sooner or later, it would find me just lying there. Then it stopped to drink water from a water spout. Just then, I heard a noise that came from outside. Then it ran out quickly, but I waited till it was gone. My butt was so numb that I couldn't run, but I tried. I had to get out. It wouldn't be back before long. I headed back to the tunnel where the others were. Then I saw the creature. It was coming back again. But there was something different about its fur. Then I thought, man, could there be two of them? I finally got up to the others and out of the hazy fog. Then we saw another creature coming into view. In its mouth, it had a small animal. It was a little dog. My suspicion about how many there were was true. I was overwhelmed at what I was witnessing there. You only read about things like that in a storybook. Those creatures had been written about for years. I later wondered if it was worth the risk that we took. The creatures began to eat their captured prey as we hid in the tunnel, trying to be still and quiet. Then Mr. Kim quietly said, we must be on our way. If they see us, we might become part of their diet. As we made our move, he dropped the gun somehow, and it tumbled down and landed on the rocks below. The noise startled the creatures. Then they growled. Suddenly, the room was filled with a horrifying echo. Mr. Kim said, get out of here and try to make it out. They're going to find us. It was just a matter of time. Mr. H said, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You're thinking of staying? Are you out of your mind? Mr. Kim said, I'm way too slow. I'll never make it. You guys go. I'll hold them off as long as I can. I said, so this whole thing ends here? That's bullshit. I told Mr. H, get out of here and take this old man. If I don't distract them somehow, we'll all be caught. Mr. Kim said, I'm not going to leave without you. I said, we all know it's the only chance we've got. Both of you need to go. There's no time to argue. They reluctantly agreed, but before heading back, Mr. Kim said, how will I know if you make it out okay? I said, you'll know. Now you had better make tracks. You stick around any longer, you won't get away. I noticed the creature couldn't see too well. They had trouble focusing with all the haze around. Eventually, they'd find me with their sense of smell, and if I stayed there, the other guys would be found. I'd try to make it outside to the other metal grate without being seen by the creatures, of course. I needed a diversion so the others could escape. One thing was for sure, I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to move rather quickly. I really had no choice. If not, they would find out where the others were at. They suddenly stopped when they heard a noise. The chamber then echoed with the sound of a cat. They just looked around. They seemed confused. Just then, I quietly reached down to pick up a stick. I threw it behind them, hoping they'd move. And in that split second, I'd have to move quick. I decided to hide in a spot that I had seen before, and hopefully I'd make it there without being seen. I'd have to climb about 15 feet, maybe more, and as I slowly made my way up, I kept meowing. A flurry of sounds echoed throughout the chamber as the creatures were frantically running around. I could hear them grunting and growling with anger, searching for whatever was making those sounds. Then I heard a noise. It was literally breathtaking. The creatures heard it as well, and away they went. It was all the racket that the boys were making, and I knew the creatures would pick up their scent. I had to get the creatures' attention and do it quickly. If not, the guys would be caught before they got out. So I quickly climbed down so they could see me. Then I threw rocks at them, and I started to shout. My diversion worked. It stopped them in their tracks. Then they both saw me and started running my way. And when I got to the opening, I didn't look back, so I got outside and then I closed the metal grate. I quickly covered it with a lot of old rags and sticks. By no means did I think it would keep them inside, but once again, I would rely on one of my old tricks. If it worked, I would have a temporary place to hide. While open, the grate rested in an angled position, therefore leaving a gap between it and the ground. I'd crawl into that gap and hide from the opposition, hoping when the grate opened, I wouldn't be found. Well, that was my well-thought-out theorized plan. I actually thought about it when I came out before. Will it work when the moment of truth was at hand? I could be crushed when they opened that metal door. As I got into position, I covered myself with debris. They were already at the gate from what I could tell. Then they hit the grate, opening it rather forcefully. The creatures bolted out as if escaping from hell. The grate flew open and it landed right on my chest, along with the sticks and rags I threw on the grate. The creatures didn't see me under all that mess. I couldn't move. They were right there. I had to wait. And when one of them stood on top, I was surprised. I thought for sure they found my hiding place. And as it looked around, I took notice of its eyes. Then I noticed human features on its hairy face. Then I remembered what Mr. Kim said about love. Was I willing to take a chance and go out on a limb? Was that creature my father standing right above him? The eyes seemed so familiar. Could that be him? Oh my gosh, what a trip. But what if it wasn't him and just my imagination? The creature could surely make a meal out of me. Then I considered that could be my emancipation. No more hoping, no more shame, no more grief. What I knew that time, I wished I would have known then. But not a soul said a word about my father's death. Shame and loneliness became my closest friends. Hope was all I lived for. It was the only thing I had left. Just then I decided that I would take the chance, and in that same moment, the creature was gone. Before crawling out, I quickly took another glance. The two creatures were already heading to the pond. As I slowly and quietly crawled out, I found a lock. Then I thought, after all that, I finally had some luck. As I lifted the grate, they were by the wooden dock. Then they heard me as I went inside the aqueduct. Just as I closed the door, I could see them coming, so I hurried, put the lock on to secure the latch. I turned to look at the tunnel, and I started running. I knew that they would soon be at the metal hatch. Just then, I removed my grungy and smelly shirt, and I threw it as far as I could across the big room. I thought, if they pick up my scent, it just might work. If I were lucky, it might buy me another minute or two. I was hoping that the lock would hold long enough, and if they were to get in before I got out, I was done. Then I lost my footing when I tripped on some stuff. As I got up, I just so happened to find Mr. Kim's gun. All that time, the creatures were crawling at the door, and from what I heard, they sounded really mad. I thought, I have a gun. I don't have to run anymore. But if I shoot and kill them, I might be killing my dad. I thought they'd run away if I fired a couple of shots, but it didn't work, though. They continued their pursuit. Along with the ringing in my ears, I also saw spots. I think it actually did more harm than good to shoot. So I scurried into the tunnel as quickly as I could. Just then I heard what sounded like a loud clang. I knew exactly what that meant, and it wasn't good, but I kept going, trying to reach the rest of the gang. I could hear sounds echoing through the small hole. I bet the creatures were wondering where I went. But I continued crawling frantically like little mole, knowing sooner or later they'd pick up my scent. I finally reached the entrance to the other grate. I had to stop for a second just to catch my breath. Suddenly, I was lifted into the air. I was elevated. It was Mr. H. I said, "Man, you scared me to death." They seemed overjoyed to see that I had survived. Then Mr. Kim said, "Are you okay, kid? You look tired. We just about gave up all hope of you being alive. We waited here for a sign. Then we heard gunfire." Just then I noticed that Mr. H had brought his van. I said, "You actually brought your van into this pit?" He said, "We might have to get out in a hurry, man. And besides, I'm not very good at running shit. Then I said, "Hey guys, we're still not in the clear. If you believe that, then I say you're terribly wrong. We've got to go now. We've got to get out of here. They're coming and it will be here. They're coming and will be here before too long." We covered the entrance to the tunnel with the lid. Then we got into Mr. H's van without further delay. Mr. Kim said to me, "What happened to your shirt, kid?" I said, "I used it as a diversion so I could get away." That's crazy. I cannot even believe this. Oh my gosh. What if he could kill his dad? I mean, what if it really was her? As it could be Mr. H's or Mr. Kim's wife too, right? Thank you so much for joining me for 20 minutes of The Alley by Mingo Rubio Jr. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, universe. Thank you, God. And thank you, YouTube.